All right. Real excited to have the next gentleman on the Sports Card Shop guest line. I met him for the first time at the National in Cleveland, but I've seen his stuff and have watched his show prior to that. But that, as far as meeting in person, that was the first time. And a mutual admirer of both of our content said, John, like, why isn't Greg been on your show? And so I'm ending that drought today and welcome Greg Miller from MidLife Sports Cards.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited. I've watched many of your different channels for a while, and I'm excited to come on and get to talk some more after we got to have that first chat in Cleveland.
Yeah, no doubt, and that's my bad for it taking this long and whatnot. I'm getting older, and I walk into a room to do something, Greg, and then I forget, like, why did I come in here? So that's where I'm at. So that I don't know if that's much of a defense, but there you go. But you've done YouTube about a year. Like, your channel has just been tremendous in terms of content and growth, and we're gonna definitely talk about that. But it's the old standby starting first time on the show question, kind of your entrance into the hobby many years ago, and kind of how it's come full circle and where you are today.
Yeah, so when I was a kid, every Friday I would get $1 allowance from my dad, and we would on the way home from school, he'd pick us up on Fridays, my brother and myself, and we would head home. And on the way, we'd stop at 7-Eleven, and usually we'd spend our dollar for the week at 7-Eleven. And this was about 1986, 1987, and so what started happening is I started buying Garbage Pail Kids and then 87 Tops cards packs. And at the time, they were a quarter, so I'd buy 4 of them. And then I'd go home and I started collecting them. That's really where the cards started. And then my brother needed a new bike. And so we were garage sailing one Saturday looking for a bike for my brother. And next thing you know, I found this house, and they had a binder for sports cards, and it had pages in it, and it had a few 86 Tops cards in it, nothing special. And I was just like, oh my gosh, it's a place to put my cards. And at that point, I kind of could formally collect. And so I started to put my cards when I'd get my packs into the binder and the pages. And then fast forward to about 1988, when card shops started popping up all over. And I was driving, running an errand with my mom. We looked over and I saw this thing. It said Cards and Cards was the name of the card shop, and it said sports cards. And I begged her to go in. We went in, and I made many, many bicycle trips down to Cards and Cards for the next few years. And then eventually, so it's really my brother and I. And then eventually, what happened is we got my dad into cards because we were going to card shows. We started getting in the backs of Beckett's. It would say, all the different shows for the month, and we would know the locations. That was our only source of information for him. So we'd go to them, and my dad would bring us. And eventually, he was like, I I mean, I remember seeing him. I remember the moment I was walking across the card show down an aisle. It was a big card show in San Francisco, several hundred tables, and he's walking toward me with this big smile on his face. And he had put together over that day the 1960 Tops Yankee team set, including the mantle. And I was like, "Why 1960?" He goes, "That's one of the sets I collected as a kid." And so he was hooked. And then the journey really took off because now it was not just him driving my brother and me. It was the three of us kind of started the journey together. And then, I continued to dabble. We continued to go to the big shows. San Francisco used to have a massive show Labor Day weekend every year. There's a fashion district, some huge buildings there. The National actually was there one year. We actually attended that. Moscone Center, downtown San Francisco. And we just kind of West Coast went everywhere. And then when I got into college, I still was collecting, but I had so many things going on. So I started getting more into ticket stubs, and I started getting into golf cards. So I was doing a lot of 81, 82 golf card sets, and I was collecting a lot of Olympic ticket stubs. And then, I continued to check eBay along the way. I would always check what the Ernie Banks rookie card was going for, what the Yogi Berra rookie card was going for. But I wasn't buying because we had a single income. I was working. We had two daughters, and so I wasn't really buying. And then over the last few years, as my wife started working again and money got a little bit freer and my kids got older, I'm like, I need to get a hobby back and I need to really get into something. And so the age of my kids and myself and our income, it all kind of worked. And here I am.
That's awesome, and I love the family bonds, right? Like with your brother, your dad, rekindling it for him. Like he said, he collected as a kid, and here he is. He's back, and like you said, you knew just by looking at him, he had that,
Oh,
like
yeah.
the cat swallowed. I'll call it the cat swallowed the canary, kind of grin, and
Yeah.
you know, I love that stories because I think for especially people around our age, Craig, and maybe a little bit younger or definitely older, there was always someone else that kind of got us the itch or the bug, right? For me, it was my grandfather and my dad. And then my dad stopped, and similar story to you, when I started really getting heavy into it again, he started picking up some stuff again. And because all his stuff, like the story goes, bike spokes and throwing them against the wall and trading them. So he picked up some. He's we're from Brooklyn, so he went the Brooklyn Dodgers route, and but it's always those common threads, right? Those family threads that whether it's nostalgia or sentimental. I just love hearing that because it for a lot of us it rings close to home. Maybe not as much in current times, but I'm sure it still does too. Even no matter what area you're in, though, there's those similar stories as well. I saw an episode where you had your dad on, and you were looking through, a binder, and he was talking about, some of the backstory behind the cards, and then finding that card again. Not the actual. Well, in one case, it was the actual card in the
Yeah.
card store. Just you can't put a price on stuff like that. Like you've had a lot of guests on your show, as I have, but it's those kind of moments, right? You can't. That's not scripted. You can't make that stuff up. That's
Yeah.
that's true reality hobby TV, if you will. And even watching that and like just relating to it myself with my dad and that sort of thing. I mean, that's
Well,
got to it's got to be cool for you. What doing an episode like that. Let's say.
it absolutely is. And, I was actually, believe it or not, I was listening to a Howard Stern episode several years ago. And Howard Stern was talking about how he hired a full, like, camera crew and producer and stuff to come and film him talking with his parents because he knew that his parents, were none of us are going to last forever. And he wanted to capture that conversation with his parents about different stories and their backgrounds, and and that's one of the reasons I wanted to have my dad on a few times, and I'll keep having him on. But it's because I get to capture it, and I have that now forever. It's a time capsule, and it's there, and I can always go back and watch it. And he came with me to the National in Cleveland. He was there. He made some big purchases. A lot of my circle of buddies know him, and we're excited to meet him as well. And so it is definitely, it was a very memorable event to be able to go to Cleveland with him. And he said to me just the other day, he goes, yeah, I mean, next year in Chicago, we'll have to make sure we do this. And I was like, oh, I guess we're going to Chicago together again, you know? So he definitely has the itch, and he's got a pretty, I mean, he's got a really nice collection. So it's something fun for us to share for sure.
Yeah, no doubt. I love hearing that. And speaking of, we'll segue into talking about Cleveland and the National. So they're going to be in Chicago the next 3 years. So
Hmm.
your dad could say Chicago, Chicago, Chicago.
Yeah.
Kind of your thoughts. You don't have to necessarily deep dive it, but now that it's in the books and wrapped up, your thoughts, Cleveland overall. I've heard other people say, Greg, that they feel Cleveland's outgrown it. I know traffic was an issue. I didn't feel like indoors in the building itself. It wasn't like we were packed in there like sardines. So I don't. It might be the traffic issue, but I mean Cleveland's a great sports town. Not I don't have a rich history of championships, but it's
Hmm.
still a great sports town. I'd like to. I'm a little biased too because I can drive to Cleveland, but I hope it gets back there again. But kind of now that it's in the books, your assessment of the National and Cleveland.
Well, I think that they did a good job. I mean, it's a big facility. It's obviously not the biggest in the country, but it's a very big facility, and I felt like he was fairly organized. Were there long lines when I got my badge the first day? Of course. Was there long lines getting out the first night, especially? Yes. But, it's just like when I, drive to San Francisco and go to a Giants game, or Santa Clara and go to a 49er game. It's just kind of part of the deal. Um, I felt like there weren't a lot of like hiccups. It wasn't people talking about, oh, I ordered my tickets and I didn't get them, or they didn't open on time, or the complaints that we had were kind of minor. I mean, when we have tens of thousands of people in the same location, of course the Wi-Fi and the internet's not going to be that good, especially when it's indoors in a big old building like that. Like, that's just part of it. My main issue, or my main feeling, is that the number one thing is the accessibility for people. And it's really easy to fly into a town like Chicago. Chicago's got a big airport, it's a hub, it's easy to fly there from anywhere. Um, the hotels are across the street. So, there were times where I know people were a little concerned going in and out of the area with as much cash as they had on them, or the cards that they had on them, because you're not right at your hotel, which provides some sense of security. But Chicago, you don't have that concern. Cleveland's a little bit more spread out. The hotels aren't all right there. So you kind of had to drive in, which is part of the reason for all the car traffic. So I thought that the show was great. I thought that the layout where they put the corporate booths kind of together in this section, and the autographs in this section, and there was really the main thoroughfare for the cards, and I had a great time. I mean, and I know people were upset because they didn't have the aisles where you could just walk this aisle and then walk this way back. They kind of had it in squares, but that maximizes the surface area of the space, and it also provides a way for you getting lost isn't good necessarily for you, but it kind of is for the dealers, because it forces you through areas you maybe wouldn't have. So overall, honestly, I thought it was great, and I know there were complaints, and sure there are things I could complain about, but I had a great time. That said, I am looking forward to Chicago because it's a little closer for me. I can fly from Sacramento to Chicago instead of having to go to San Francisco to get a direct flight. You know, I know it needs to be kind of at least Midwest to East Coast, because that's where the majority of the dealers are located. If you do it in Las Vegas, if you do it in LA, there are a lot of people who aren't going to come because they have to go across the country. It's the same reason I don't really feel like it should be in Atlanta. It's like Atlanta's on a coast. It's a long route for a lot of people. It's not near the dealers. That just they might have the infrastructure to do it, but I don't think that that's the way to make it accessible. And I think, Denver would be a decent option, but I think Chicago is just kind of like, it makes the most sense. It's great for a lot of reasons, and people talk about, well, it's not, nobody's big enough now, or it's getting, everything is going to be outgrown. And I think there are ways around that. You could make it, instead of 5 days or something, you could make it, 8 or 9. You could do 7 or 8. There are some things that they could do to expand that part of it. But honestly, I thought it was great. And I'll be back at the Cleveland airport in April to go to Strongsville. So they haven't seen the last of me for a while.
There you go. I agree for the most part, almost across the board. And you know how this goes, Greg. Some people are just going to complain. They're going to find something. You could pull off the perfect game national, right? And they're going to find one thing to nitpick over. The one thing I won't give the national a pass on is the Wi-Fi, because you kind of know. I've been to other large events that are of similar ilk, and Wi-Fi wasn't an issue. You know how many dealers are setting up. You know how many breakers are setting up. You have an approximate number of how many people are going to be walking through the doors. It's not an exact science, but you got to sort of, and you have a year, well, not a whole year, but you have, let's say 9-10 months to sort of prepare for that. So I won't give them a pass on the Wi-Fi. The traffic, you're held hostage by the city situation. It was an issue with hotels not being real close to Cleveland. That's because the building's in sort of a industrial center. That building was built during the war days, when that was kind of a bomb shelter
They
as
built
well. So
tanks in that building.
yeah,
That's
yeah.
a
So
tank manufacturing plant.
it's a product of the environment. I'd like to see, maybe they can put some hotels around. There's land there. They can maybe put some development, some hotels in there in the future. But like you, I thought it went pretty smooth. You got a new leadership group. Is their first four. They're not new to shows, but this was their first national. So I'm giving them a little bit. I don't want to say a pass, but I'm giving them a little bit of a grading curve, some education speak there. So I don't have too many complaints at all. I'll just hammer them on the Wi-Fi a little bit more
Sure.
than you did. The food trucks were great. I'm not a lunch eater. When I go to Nashville, I've talked about, I just do like granola bars and beef jerky and water, and then I make up for that at dinner time. So it's all smelled good. Like I was
Yeah.
almost tempted to break my rule. I thought that was a nice touch, because for dealers who have to eat there every day, they had different choices. It didn't have to be pizza every day. They could have pizza. I saw gyros. I saw tacos. So there was the menu was kind of eclectic, which was good for people who were eating on site. First
And
time I've
I mean,
ever heard. Go ahead.
I
Go ahead.
I personally, I never even planned on eating there. I literally did exactly what you said, like exactly. I brought in some, before I left home in Sacramento. I packed my backpack with a bunch of Cliff Bars, a bunch of beef jerky. I had Advil with me because I knew I would probably be in some pain. Like I 100% was never planning on buying a burger or a slice of pizza or anything. So when people were complaining about that, I'm kind of like, well, what did you think was going to be? Like, of course it's going to be expensive and there's going to be long lines because there's a bunch of guys there who like to eat. I think I bought a beer on Wednesday and a beer on Thursday, and that was pretty much the extent of what I bought there. So
Yeah, there was a lot of beer sales. Like there was a couple of people, Greg. I didn't know them, but I saw them with a lot of beer in their hands consistently. I'm like, are you here at the bar? Or are you here for some sports cards? I really
yeah.
started to to question. I'm half kidding, and I'm also half serious. You brought up something I really kind of like it. I've never heard anyone else say it. I want to ask you about that. But before I do, I want to tell you probably the stuff you've heard and the stuff I've heard, right? Because how big the hobby's got and how big the nationals got, right? I've heard talk of having two nationals a year rather than one. I'm not for speaking for myself, and then I'll get your 2 cents. I don't want to see two nationals. I think it will lose some of the luster if you have two. There's one Super Bowl a year, there's one World Series a year. Even if it's busy because there's only one, I really only want it to be one national. But what you said, a light bulb went off, and I love the idea. I signed that petition yesterday. Maybe make the national 8, 9, 10 days, like you said. You don't. That doesn't mean you have to go for all 10 days. People, obviously, dealers would, but that's their livelihood and their business. So that's a whole different animal. But maybe I would pick 4 or 5 days. I'm going these 4 or 5 days. Someone else would pick a different, maybe potentially 4 or 5 days, and maybe you'd have more people, but it wouldn't seem like that because they would be there at different times.
Mm-hmm.
I've never heard that before. When listening to you say that, I'm like that. I love that. I
Well,
think that's
let me go
genius.
even further with that. Like, it falls on my birthday every year, and it has for
Yeah,
25 years. When my dad got so into the hobby that he was going to when I was in college, he was going to the National in Atlantic City and Cleveland and LA and Chicago without me. And he would call me each night and tell me how the show went, and we'd talk about it. And he would always say, "Are you sure it's okay that I miss your birthday this year?" And I'm like, "Yes, it's fine. I'm an adult. It's all good." And my buddy Mookie, Mookie. We sat and talked in
yeah,
the aisle. Mookie's anniversary is during the national, and he's like, "Man, this is like my one chance, my one opportunity to do this." See, the reason that two nationals don't work is the thing about the national is it's not just about the cards. The cards are on eBay every night. They're on REA. They're on Golden. It's a reunion with all of your friends who share the hobby.
yeah,
And so if you do too, it's like having a high school reunion and going, okay, well this weekend it's A through M, and then the next weekend it's N through Z, and you're like, but half the people are over there. But if you do it over 8, 9 days, you can coordinate with your core circle and say, what days are you going? Hey, can we do it these days? And you can make sure that there's overlap, that you get to see your key guys. But if you have this thing that's two different ones, to me, it's not the same thing. It would absolutely lose the luster, and I would be way less likely to attend because I would only be going to the one that half of my pals were going to.
yeah. That's a great point. We're both waving the same pennant here, Greg. I don't want to see two. I love your idea of just making it longer. It
Yeah.
doesn't mean you don't have to go. You buy passes, you buy tickets for the days you want to go. And they can even gauge with those ticket sales, like what days might be more people there than another one, let's say. I think there'll be more people if they did. Someone will say, well, less people will go because they can't go for the whole time. We don't have to go for the whole time. That's the beauty
Well,
of it.
well, and
It's not like if you can't. Yeah, go ahead.
they're turning away dealers, right? They're turning away dealers, and all the modern collectors were mad this year because a lot of the dealers that get turned away are the newer dealers, and the newer dealers are a lot of the modern dealers. And so a lot of collectors were mad that it seemed like there was more vintage, and that's because they turned away dealers. What if they had it where it was, 8, 9 days, or even call it 10 days, and the first 5 days be the vintage days, and the next 5 days be the modern days. And then you can have the dealers that do both do all 10, or you could have more booths for the first 5. And people say, oh, but the setup wouldn't work because people have to load in and load out. You could have some sort of flex day in the middle, or you could do something where you just make it more accessible so that everyone can go at the time that they want. And I mean, it seems too obvious. It's like, you go to Disneyland, and in the summertime, it's open till midnight because it's jammed in the summertime. And during the holidays, it's open till midnight. But if you go there in October, it closes at like 8 o'clock
Yeah.
because it's not jammed. You don't need more hours to get through the park because there are less people. So it seems like it's just a release valve that you could open and shut and find the sweet spot of it. And it just makes too much sense to me.
It does. I'm on board. I'm right behind you when we march to the Capitol. No, it makes sense, and I definitely don't want to see two. Like you, I think you hit the nail on the head. The bloom comes off the rose a little bit. I think what winds up happening is both shows, if they ever went to two now, both shows actually get watered down in that process. I'd rather have one big one, even if some people complain about something or other. It is what it is. Then you don't have to go, right? We make a choice to go. Like you said, you go to an NFL game, a 49, like, hey, I'm going to be in the parking lot probably an hour to 2 hours after the game trying to get out. Like I kind of
Yeah.
sign up for,
Yeah.
sign up for this. So, when I go, I'm a Steelers fan. So when I go to, it's Acrisure Stadium, and I still say Heinz Field. When I go to the stadium, I know it's going to be probably an hour before I get on the main highway and get rolling again. That's
Mhm.
just par for the course. So
My daughters
you
went
kind
to a
of,
Giants game yesterday with my brother, and
and it's
the game.
preseason, no less.
Well, no, the Giants, baseball Giants, San
Pay.
Francisco.
Oh, okay, okay, all
And
right, all
so,
right.
but when the game started at 1, and the game ended at like 4, and my wife and I looked at each other and said, well, they'll probably get home at about 8 because they're going to stop and
Yeah,
eat. It's going to be a drive, and it's going to be a lot of traffic. I mean, it's not a surprise.
yeah, yeah. And listen, if you do this long enough, it shouldn't be. You should know. The other thing, I'm going to stick up for the West Coast here. I know you said you're fine if you don't get it, but you like Chicago. I'm a fairness guy. I'm an East Coast guy. We're kind of spoiled. I don't know if we'll get it in Atlantic City again. Cleveland's drivable. Chicago's not, but it's at least midpoint, if you will. I think you should have a West Coast National, whether that's in the form of Seattle, Northwest, Anaheim, San Francisco, Las Vegas. You mentioned, but I think in fairness to collectors, right? That why should you guys have to travel the furthest every year? Maybe not. I'll say this. Maybe not have it in an exact rotation where it's West Coast, Midwest, and then East, like exactly like that. But I think there should be a West Coast National for the folks and collectors and hobbyists out that way. If I lived there, I'd want that. You
Well,
know,
obviously, part of me would like it just because of the ease and accessibility, and we really only have one big show on the West Coast now, which is the Burbank show. And
yeah,
even that's a 7-hour drive for me because it's not actually in Burbank. It's an hour south of Burbank. But when I think about it, again, for me, I just want to compromise. It's like when you're setting the time for dinner on Thanksgiving with the whole family and you're trying to find a time that works for everyone. I just want to find a place that works for everyone so that everybody can attend and be happy. And if we're not doing it where everyone can attend and be happy, if we did it in LA, it would be better for me, but a lot of my East Coast buddies probably wouldn't be able to make it. And so I would rather travel to Denver, which is, west-ish, and then it's a little bit further from them, but it's a little bit, from me, but it's a hub in the middle where we can all kind of get to it. Denver, I don't know what they have as far as facilities, but they've got a huge airport, and it's kind of close to everything. It's a 3-hour flight for everyone, and that one is a place I wish that they would consider, but they must not have a convention center that can handle it. Otherwise, it just seems too obvious to me.
yeah. No, I'm there's it's I guess it's easy to say, hey, have it here, have it there. There's more. I've had Ray on the show. You got hotel issues and a lot
Hmm.
of other logistics. We can make this a mobster show and talk about the unions. I'm
Yeah,
not
well,
going to.
that's the union is part of it though. It's part of the
Yeah,
deal.
yeah. So, but I'd like, and I would get there. It might cost me a few extra shekels, but I'd come to Cal. I've never been to California, so it's a good reason for the first time ever. But in fair, I try to be fair to everyone, right? It's easy for me to say, hey, be in Atlantic City every year, I can drive. Be in Cleveland every year, I can drive. Be in New York City, it's my hometown, I can drive. But I try to think of the big picture, and like I'd like to see it. How often I don't know. It's not for me to say, but I think it's fair. There's plenty. I hear well the bulk of collectors are on the East Coast. Like, what are we doing? Weighing people? Maybe the heavier people are on the East Coast, but I think
Mhm.
there's millions of people on both coasts who are in the hobby. So, in fairness, with that being said, like I'm not opposed. I'd love to see it on the West Coast. Might cost a little bit more for me, but what are you going to do? That's life, right? So
Well, and
you
it
got a
has
choice,
been.
right? Go or you can't go. Like that's it.
It
And it has
has
been. You're
been.
right.
It's been in
Yeah.
LA. Anaheim's got a big convention center. That's where one of the Burbank shows is. I think it's the August one is in Anaheim, right across the street from Disneyland. It obviously has the airports and the hotels. And San Francisco's hosted it. It's been a long time, but so they have had it. It but my understanding is now they pull the dealers, and the dealers are the ones that decide the every other year. And so they're going to probably pick what's going to be most convenient for them. But it is what it is.
All right. Staying along those lines, this was a question. I don't write a ton of stuff down. I'm more of a conversationalist, but it's a good segue. We're seeing you're aware of this. We're seeing a lot more shows pop up in smaller towns and smaller venues that have never even had a card show before. And while I support that, I think it's great that those communities can get those shows. We're also seeing a lot more regional, a lot more bigger city shows where there's just a plethora of shows. And I'm a dealer too. Like I set up at shows and I'm a consumer. I go to shows, so I wear both of those hats. I don't want to say fear. That might be too strong a word. But one of my concerns is like we might get to a saturation point, Greg, where we have too many shows. And again, talking about bloom coming off the rose, right? Is sometimes too much of a good thing is a bad thing. What are your thoughts on maybe an oversaturation of shows?
Well, I think that, in the late 80s, early 90s, there were card shops popping up all over the place. I mentioned the first one that I was going to is called Cards and Cards. Well, a few months later, a shop opened across the street from them called the Boys of Summer. And then there's a card shop literally a quarter of a mile down the road called Timeout Sports Cards. And there was absolutely an oversaturation, but I also believe I'm kind of an economist by heart. I love economics. I took economics electives in college because I like it so much. I believe in the free market, and the free market will find the sweet spot. And if too many shows pop up, what will happen is they'll cannibalize each other, and they won't make money. And then those shows will go away, and they'll pop up it'll find the sweet spot. It'll find the equilibrium of what the right amount is. And I think that, yeah, right now there are probably some people that are trying to capitalize and maybe put on a few too many shows in some areas. Some people are saying, what are you talking about? I can't find a show anywhere. But a lot of places it's getting a little carried away, and it'll find the sweet spot. And so I kind of don't really overthink that and just say, whatever the right amount is where we'll land. And right now, there are probably some people that are doing some shows promoting and not doing super well, and others are doing great, and it'll work itself out.
Yeah, that's a good way to look at it. And you convinced me, right? The strongest will, like the saying, what
Yeah.
strongest will survive. I guess from a sentimental point, I'm trying to save everybody, but you
Well,
you know how that goes. You can't.
here's the other thing I'll throw out there too, though, is competition. I also believe is good. And so, if there are a lot of shows popping up, it forces each show to be better. It forces the prices down for the entrance, or if it's too much, people will say, "I'll just wait for the one next weekend." It forces them to really advertise to the good dealers and get the good stuff in the room, and a facility that's nice, not an old gym with no AC and bad tables. And So I think that the competition is good for us as collectors. So I don't think I'm going to be a person that's going to complain about too many shows, because the the competition is going to make the shows that do make it out on the other end better shows, which is good for us as collectors.
Yeah, you convinced me. I'm not as worried. Like you said, it'll all shake out in the end, one way or the other. We talk going back to Nashville. I also too like the layout. You had if you had no interest in breaking, you could avoid that area almost altogether. If you didn't want to deal with the corporate presence, you can avoid that as well. I hope that is something the new powers that be kind of keep that layout in Chicago. I got a feeling they're gonna. We'll see how that goes. The one thing I noticed, and it's just par for the course with the hobby, with more people in the hobby. The food court became a trade night during the show, even though there were signs that said, these tables are for food consumption only. It's hard to police that. But downstairs, I don't know if you got downstairs much. That was a trade night. The one thing, maybe I'm sort of projecting myself too much, Greg. Starting in 1979 with that 79 Tops pack as a 7-year-old. The one thing I picked up, and I don't want to make it like I just realized this at the Cleveland National, but it really set in even more so, is seeing some of these trades and deals and these younger folks, not just younger folks, but predominantly younger folks. Now, when you're my age, almost everyone is younger folks, so that's a pretty broad brush. But like I'm seeing less attachment to the cards. I don't know about you. I acquire a card. Like I'm a show dealer too. Like I have a show inventory and I have all this stuff that's here that never makes it to my show. But I wasn't staring or I wasn't involved, but I kind of picked up on stuff and watched some stuff. And it felt like there was just no personality to the cards. They were just, hey, this is worth $1,500. I'll give you this and this. And I heard one young man say, "I just acquired that an hour ago," and he dealt it again. Like he didn't even have it
Mhm.
like an hour. And I guess I say to myself, and I'll get your take on it. I'm glad I kind of grew up in the hobby era I did, because I feel like, if this is old man on the porch, then it is. I feel like I have a greater appreciation. Yeah, I'm not going to sit here and tell you I don't care what the cards are worth, or I got a deal on that, or I paid because I had to have that. But there's more. It seems like there's more of attachment. There's more of a story. Where in watching some of these trades and transactions, they're like pawns on a chessboard, and
Mhm.
it sort of bothers me. It's none of my business per se, other than being a talking head in the hobby. Is that something that you pick up on? Does it bother you, or do you say it is what it is?
I completely agree with you. I think that you're spot on. Uh, it doesn't bother me because I don't actually think I'm in the same hobby as those people. My hobby is collecting sports cards. I collect basketball, football, baseball cards. I collect cards. These people, the hobby that they have is not actually cards. The hobby is flipping, and the medium that they use are cards. And so it's a completely different thing. And it's my students ask me, I'm a high school teacher, and they ask me, and I teach personal finance. They ask me about cryptocurrency. They ask me about Bitcoin. And they're like, "What do you think about Bitcoin?" And I'm like, I am not a buyer of Bitcoin personally. I'm old school, where I research a company I believe in that I think is headed in a good direction. I then investigate the company and the decisions that they've made. I look at the long-term trajectory. I look at their past. I look at the things that they're doing, and then I make a decision. So I might go, if I'm a Midwest guy who's all about Ford, I buy Ford because I believe in Ford, and I'm going to invest in Ford because Ford is my company. And that's not how younger generations are right now. They're about, I mean, you hear these channels and they always say keep it moving, keep it moving, keep it moving. As soon as it comes in, it's for sale, and they're trying to keep it moving. I think it's Roth cards. I'm not sure. I watch his channel because I find it interesting. But Roth cards, didn't he used to do sneakers before he did cards? And
Yeah.
his medium then was sneakers. It wasn't that he was a sneaker guy. It's that he was a flipper, and the medium was sneakers, and now the medium are cards. So I don't really consider those people to be in the same hobby as me. They're at the same locations as me. They buy some of the same things that I buy, but they're not card collectors. They're flippers. Now, there are card collectors who buy modern cards, but a lot of the guys that I think that you're referring to, they look at it as an investment. They look at it as a hot potato. They don't want, it's like the musical chairs. You don't want to be the guy left without a chair. So you got to move it quickly before, you run out of time. And that's not what I do. What I do is I like the history of the game. I like knowing that I have a baseball card of Jackie Robinson. And what Jackie Robinson, I mean, just saying that right now, I just got goosebumps. Like Jackie Robinson, what he did for our country. I say to my kids, did you guys learn about Jackie Robinson? They're like, oh, yeah, like they have reverence for Jackie Robinson. I have a Jackie Robinson card. I have a Ted Williams cards where, he was a war hero and probably the best hitter of all time and a pretty darn decent person. And so, I want those sorts of things. And I like learning about the history, not just of the player, but of the set, of the issue, of the card itself. And that is part of the fun for me. And the kids that are buying, the, you know, animal print refractor out of 5 with Joe Burrow, it's not about Joe Burrow in most cases, but for some of them it is. Some of them are card collectors, and some of those are flippers. So
Yeah.
it sometimes bugs me that they're using what I love as their medium to try to make 10%, and make a few bucks. It kind of bugs me a little bit, but I just don't really associate them as the same hobby that you and I are participating in.
Yeah, it's a great point, and maybe I got to get to that point. I guess I try. It's the old average adage, right? You try to save everyone, and that's a little dramatic, and I don't mean it exactly like it sounds, but everyone can't. I guess you grow up in a certain way, and I feel like they're missing out, like you said, the history of sports and what people meant to society and different things like that. I feel like they're missing that, but they don't want to learn that. Like if they wanted to learn that, they'd be doing that. So, like you said, they're in a different genre, if you will, or niche of the hobby that maybe me and you don't partake in. And I probably shouldn't let it bother me, but when it's in your face and you see it, you know what I
Mhm.
mean? Like it hits home, and like I just say, man, I'm glad while it makes me older today, I'm also glad I grew up in the age of the hobby that I did, because I got to enjoy it for, I don't know, this might be a strong statement, but for the right reason. Not that they're wrong, but or for different reasons that I still hold valuable today. Many of what you just spoke very poetically about, right? It's more than the cardboard. It's about that person, serving his country, that person breaking down societal barriers and making
Mhm.
people think differently. And then on top of that, the great athletes they were in addition to that. I guess I wish more people appreciated it for those kind of reasons, but it is what it is. And you kind of I like how you said it, right? We're in the same location. We might be in the same building, but we're doing things differently.
It's a
So I
completely
guess,
different hobby. Yeah.
yeah, I need to really. I'm gonna next time I kind of get peeved.
Yeah.
I'm gonna hear your voice in my head, Greg, and I'm gonna feel better. I'm gonna feel like,
Shoot,
okay,
shoot me a
that's the
text and
voice
say,
of.
Greg, what was it that she said about this? And I'll fire it back, and then you'll go, that's right. All right, cool.
Yeah, yeah, no doubt. But it's well said, and it's I probably need to think more, along those lines. We've seen even the grading field change. With collectors acquiring SGC. I'm an SGC and PSA guy, truth be told. So that didn't bother me, that acquisition. My fear was a Fanatics or something buying an SGC, which allegedly was on the table, or they had attempted to. It obviously didn't happen. I thought that would have been a huge conflict of interest. I'm a bulk subber for SGC. They sponsor this podcast we're on right now. That would have been, and I've said this to them directly, so this is not me saying it now and them hearing it and saying, wow, I never heard John. That would have been had that happened, Greg. That would have been a deal breaker for me, being a conflict of interest. I wouldn't
Mhm.
have sent my cards there, and I wouldn't have taken anyone else's cards to bulk sub to them had Fanatics acquired SGC. But with collectors, they're arguably, well, not arguably, really, they are the number one and two grading card companies in the industry. I think, at least for the immediate impact, I think it's going to be a good thing. Your take on that, as someone, think I'm a little biased with the whole SGC thing. So, what's your assessment of that?
Yeah, I mean, I'm a little bummed out that collectors acquired SGC. I'm bummed out because I always saw SGC as sort of like the mom and pop coffee shop that you go down and they say hi and they know your name, and they make your drink before you even order because they know you. And then PSA is like, Starbucks or something. And and I really, really like Peter. I'd love to have Peter on my channel. I went by the SGC booth a couple of times, hoping he'd be hanging out. I wanted to say hello to him. And so I was bummed out. And then what happens is when they go under the same umbrella under collectors, then I feel like, we all start putting our tinfoil hats on about, well, what's really happening? Why have they been doing on-site grading the last couple of years at the National, but this year they suddenly weren't? And how come PSA was in one corner of the building and the furthest point away is where SGC was? If they're the same, under the same umbrella, why shouldn't they be next to each other? Because they're cousins, they're not, rivals. And so, the whole thing, the part that I think bugs me is I'm just bummed out that that's how it played out. Um, I've sent into both. I own cards of both. For years and years and years, I was only PSA. And then finally, about a year and a half ago, I broke down and started collecting SGC as well because I think they do a good job. But also, I wanted to submit to them because I don't want to wait for 4 months to get my cards and pay twice as much. I think they do a great job. And so, and again, I feel like Peter was absolutely killing it in the PR contest. Is he was out and about, he was doing interviews, he was doing this kind of thing. And Nat Turner goes on from time to time, and he does some interviews, but he's collectors. He's not the PSA guy. I know PSA is a big part of collectors, but it's PSA. It's not. So I don't know. I was bummed out. I guess I'll just keep going back to that. What will happen in the long term? I don't know. I think that SGC is doing a great job. I hope that they don't start to have enough of self cannibalization that they start to change things from how they're going right now. When I see things like, I'm sure you saw Chris Sewell's video where he cracked a bunch of cards from PSA and then submitted them to SGC, and the grades came back different. And then Mike Moynihan had a video where he had a bunch of cards that came back as altered or trimmed or whatever, and then they got slabbed by SGC. And then that makes me go, well, what's going on? What is real? Is SGC too lenient, or is PSA too strict, or does this company not know what they're doing, or this company not know what they're doing? But if I'm Nat Turner and I see those two videos, I I am not happy that I've got people submitting cards coming back as trimmed, going into another company that I own, and that coming back holdered in good grades. it just makes you go, well, what in the heck is going on? I don't know what to think anymore. But I wouldn't have thought that so much if they weren't under the same company, because I would say, well, this person's wrong. They're wrong. But if they're sharing some technologies, and I don't know what to think anymore. So as a whole,
Yeah.
I submit to both.
You,
I buy
yeah.
both. I think both have some things they do well and some things that they don't do well. And I'm bummed out that they're under the same umbrella, because I feel like at the end of the day, I just have a tinfoil hat on all the time when it comes to grading now.
Yeah, you some great points there, Greg, to unpack. I agree with you. Mentioned the videos where cars that were graded one way were graded differently by the other company, and graded right, and actually
Hmm.
graded and slabbed, and it is a head scratcher, and it's disappointing to see. I'm not going to stick up for him. I've talked to Peter, and when we, I said, listen, I'm not going to be a shill. Like, if I don't like something, I'm going to talk about it. I'm going to use tact and be respectful. But like, so I agree with you. I think my relief, I would, if you're asking me, would I've rather SGC been a standalone company? 100%. I think my relief came from my fear was it was going to be Fanatics acquiring them. So it's like the lesser of two evils, if you will.
Hmm.
Again, I would rather SGC be standalone like they were. That's changed, but I was so afraid of the Fanatics acquisition that I've sort of conceded the collectors acquisition, and maybe a little bit less disappointed than you are. Again, would I rather they stayed their own entity? 100%, 110%, which is
Hmm.
impossible. But you get the gist, right? But that being said, I rather the outcome of that than what I was worried about happening. And you're a smart guy, like you said. You're into economics, and people as a bulk subber, it's one of the first questions all my bulk subbers ask me. God, what does this mean? And I'm like, for right now, it means status quo, but 2 to 3 years, I can't promise you that. Neither can they. And you know how
Yeah.
these deals go, right? There's going to be a handshake or a written agreement, like a couple years, no major changes, and then 2, 3 years in, right? All bets, the seatbelts come off, and different things can happen. What those are, we could do a whole show and speculate what those things might be. Maybe some people won't be there in positions that they are in now. Maybe a grading scale is going to be adopted one way, the other, and be kind of come uniform. One thing I got asked was it like, and it's a great question, right? Guys subbing 40 cards with me, like in 3 years, is that what if SGC doesn't exist anymore? And I have all these slabs, like that's a concern of mine. I looked him in his face. I told him I can't tell you at 100% that's not going to happen. I don't have a crystal ball. I don't think now if you're putting a gun in my head and asking me to give my opinion, I don't think they're not going to exist anymore. But might they exist in a different fashion? That's more likely that than not exist at all. So
Well, here's another thing for me,
yeah,
is Peter was out and about a lot, and Peter was doing a lot of interviews, and he was talking very freely. And as soon as the acquisition happened, a lot of that stopped. He's still, you see him a little bit, but not like he was. He was very active in a lot of different social medias, and if he were to come on, it's like, say he came on my show, there are certain questions that I would want to ask him that now I don't even know what the point of asking would be, because I know that his parent company is the quote unquote competition. And so he can't say something about them that he definitely would have said 2 years ago. He definitely would have said
and
1
did
year
and
ago
did
and
and
did,
did.
and now he can't. So that's the hard part. It's like, what I more than having him on my show, I would prefer to just say, not, I mean, this would never happen, but I'd love to have him over in my backyard, sit out on the back, have a drink together, eat a steak together, and just say, all right, you can erase my memory as soon as this conversation's over, but what about this, and what about that, and what about that? And like, and that's where the tinfoil hat comes in, is because it's like I keep saying, to myself, could they really not do on-site grading? I know they gave an excuse, but could they really not do it this year? Or were they told they couldn't? Were they told they couldn't? Or was that really the company's decision? Because they killed it last year at on-site grading. And to turn that away, and to have an opportunity to, have a bunch of people submit to, I don't know. And you can't even ask. If you say, Peter, so be honest with me, what's the real reason you didn't do on-site grading? He would go back to the line. And I don't blame him. I don't blame him because he has to. But we don't really know. So we can only kind of speculate
Well,
as to what's
I
really going
will.
on.
I did, and listen, he didn't tell me this was off the record, so I did get to talk to him, not live mic, but just talking to him there. And the answer I got to that, Greg, was that their turnaround time is back to that they'll say 5 to 10. I'll tell you it's 10 to 12 days. And so his thing was, and I agree partially. Let me preface that. But his thing is, when they on-site grade, it costs them quite a bit more to bring that equipment. More graders have to make the trip. It's obviously more hotel rooms. They have to have the space for the grading equipment and the encapsulation equipment. He gave me a number. I'm not going to share the number. I shared what the basically. I'll paraphrase what he told me. It's a lot more expensive to do on-site grading than not do on-site grading. And his explanation was this: if their turnaround time wasn't so short to begin with, they probably would have been more apt to do it. But the fact that he can look someone in the face and say, we're going to take this back to Boca Raton, and you're probably going to have it the week to 10 days after anyway, for, $15, we couldn't justify the the astronomical added expense. I
And
think
I
that's
get it.
part. I think
And
that's partially true, but I also
right.
get what you're saying. Maybe there was an assertion from someone else that you're not doing this.
And
So
and I like Peter so much that I have to just trust what he's saying with that. If for some reason at some point there was going to be a merge of the two, which I used to think that was going to happen for sure. I'm now not really sure. I think that Peter should be the guy who runs it. I mean, he's that good. He's really good, and he's a really good guy. And
yeah. No,
and
I
and
agree.
yeah,
No, I agree. Whether that comes to be, that's where I'm at. Is like, when people ask me like these million questions, is Peter going to survive? Is SGC going to survive? Is the grading scale going to change? Are the prices going to go up? These are all the questions. I'm forgetting some. Those are just
sure,
off the top of my head. Something's going like there's going to be answers to those questions, and they're not. You know where I'm going. They're not all
uh,
going to be good ones, right? There's no way. That's not how. That's not how this works. I'm not. For me to look someone in their face or in their eyes and tell them like, "Oh, nothing's going to change ever." It's going to just be like they never acquired them. That's not how these business deals work. People don't fork over millions of dollars to not change anything. So what
if I had
what
one question,
yeah,
for
go ahead.
Peter, one question. I saw him in an interview, and I believe it was Mike Moynihan who interviewed him at the 2023 National. He said, "We have our uh, our registry is we're just finishing it up. We're almost there. You're gonna see it very very soon." And here we are, 13 months later, and there's no SGC registry. Now, when you tell me that you are going to be independent, operating independently still, they're still PSA like they've always been. We're SGC like we've always been. And the only thing that's changed in those 13 months is Collectors acquired SGC. Where's that registry that was almost ready 13 months ago? So what's the story? That would be that would be the one question if I could ask him one.
Well, I'm going to do my best, Peter Steinberg. I can't do the voice. I think what he'd say, and again, I'm not
Yeah,
speaking for him. I didn't
sure.
get the answer to this question. I did get the answer to why they did on-site grading. This is me just going off on my own riff and spitballing. I think who's to say, right? Let's be honest, right? I don't, they sponsor the show, but I'm be honest. Who's to say maybe part of that acquisition was to prevent that registry from ever seeing the light of day, right? Let's keep it real, right?
Yeah.
Or there's the other side of the coin, depending on which side you believe more. That says that now there might be just I'll say universal. Universal to me means every major significant grading card company registry, but maybe you'll see sort of a updated combined one. I
Yeah.
probably tend to believe the first thing I said over the second thing, truth be told, but that's the two. That's I think it's one of those two, right?
Well, N-
Whatever
Nat
camp
has
you're
said
in.
Nat has said several times that the bread and butter, of PSA is the registry, and then you have Peter say that their registry is almost done, and then you have it not happen and a purchase happen in that same time period. So, um, yeah,
Yeah, it might be the first thing I said, right? Let's be
yeah,
real, right?
yeah,
I'm not, I always try to keep it real. I'm not going to stop tonight, right? So
yeah,
it might be the former rather than the latter. I hope not. I hope not. But we've got to look at all the angles, and that's a legitimate reason to pay some money, to so that doesn't happen, and so you can hang your hat on the peg that you're the only one that has one, right? It's you've become a pop one of registry companies. So
yep,
maybe that is the case. I don't want to say we'll never know, but I don't think we're going to know right away. Let's put it that way. But it's an interesting thought, and I thought about it too. It's funny you mentioned that. It's something I've thought about as well. But that's a question too. You're not going to get you're going to get a lot of like coach speak and
right.
not really get much of anything juicy. So it's one of those questions. I don't have a problem asking it, but I know I'm going to be in the same boat after the question's answered that I was before. So time will tell. I think with that whole thing, kind of just putting a bow tie on it, I think you'll agree too. It'll be in the second or third year where we see shoes dropping and different things occurring that we're not seeing at this time. And what those are, we could play bingo and have a board and see who wins. But it's going to be interesting. Next year and then 2026 with that. And who's to say, right? Collectors has a knack. Here's another angle, not to throw another. Collectors has a knack for buying something and then selling it. So who's to say they don't sell SGC to another? Again, I hope it's not Fanatics because that's a deal breaker for me. I said that from day one. So I hope that isn't the case. If that's something they think about doing. All right, enough about rich guys and rich companies, right? Uh, you've done your YouTube channel. It's grown exponentially very quickly. I attested to the person you are. You speak from the heart. You don't mince words. You're very sincere, and it's not a shtick, and I think that goes a long way. Has your growth of your channel, has it surprised you or not necessarily?
Oh, it's completely surprised me. I mean, I never started a channel for my channel to get big, and to say that my channel's big. I mean, I have 5,500 subscribers to my YouTube channel, and that's where I direct 98% of my effort. It's I'm on Instagram. I have a Twitter account. I have a TikTok account, but 98% is on YouTube. And the reason is because I like that interface for interacting with people. And the whole point of the channel was I didn't really feel like there was a place for a lot of us to communicate about cards. And I've said before, I think collecting cards can be kind of an isolating hobby. It can be kind of independent. A lot of it you're on your own. A lot of it you're sorting, you're planning, you're researching, and there are some of us in the hobby that want to do it with other people, because when you pick up a big card and you share it with a couple of people and they're super excited, like that joy that you get from that makes it so much more fun. And so the whole point of my channel was I'm going to throw out thoughts and ideas and questions and see what do other people think. And to this day, every single comment I've ever received, I have given a written response to. Um, and if I didn't give a written response, it's because it got caught in a filter somewhere and I never saw it. But every single comment, because that was always the point. I throw out a question, I throw out a topic. I want to hear what other people have to say. And other people have influenced my collecting a lot, because they've they've said things and they've shared ideas and sets and collection topics that have made me go, yeah, I agree. I like that too. And it's made it way more fun. And so I think that maybe there was just a little bit of an opening where a lot of people show cards. There are people who know 100 times more than me. John Mangini knows 100 times more than me about different sets. 100 times. Dave Blue Jacket does. Rick's Vintage Oddball Cards does. Those guys know so much more than me. And watching their channel is like literally watching a professor talk, at UC Berkeley about chemistry. It's like it's intense, and they know a crazy amount. And what I am is more of a facilitator. I'm more of the guy who just facilitates the discussion instead of the guy who's giving information that's necessarily worthy of, remembering and then executing. And so I think that people like to have a place that they can share their love of this hobby with someone else who genuinely loves this hobby. And that's what I've tried to become, and everything that I do revolves around that. I have every week I have a Q&A where people can ask me questions and I give my opinion. It really should be Q&O, because it's not an answer, it's just an opinion. Every week I do a question to my audience and ask them to respond in the comments, and then the following week I feature a lot of the comments and I talk about my take on their comments and why I thought they were good ones. Every month I have people, I offer the invitation for people to submit their favorite pickup for the month. And I do a monthly showcase of all the cards that people in the community pick up. Last month we had like 125 people submit their pickup, and we looked at them together, and it's you get to participate instead of being a student who sits and writes down notes and then goes home and memorizes. You're actually a participant in the channel. It's
It's
not,
interactive.
it's
It's interactive.
interactive, and
People
that's
love,
what.
this. People love
Yeah,
that stuff, and
yeah.
it's
And as it
not even a hobby thing, Craig. It's just in general. But go ahead. Go ahead.
as a teacher, every day I get up in front of my students, and we could do it a couple of ways. We could have me get up there and talk and talk and talk, and then write down stuff, and then memorize stuff, and then them regurgitate it on a multiple choice Scantron test. Or I can say, when we're talking about, budgeting, I can talk to them and say, hey, what do you think one of your bills are going to be when you move out here in a couple of years? What do you think that bill is going to cost? And get their responses, and then let their eyes open when you see the reality of some of the things that they took for granted, and then they remember it better. So I try to make my classroom interactive, and this is just another place where we get to interact. And I genuinely am learning as much from everybody else as they might pick up from me. And so I'm really the facilitator of the channel. It's not Greg on a soapbox, professing beliefs and things that people need to know. And that's why I think that people have caught on to it, is they like being a participant and sharing their thoughts and their opinions and their pickups.
Yeah, I heard someone else, not in the hobby, but talking about content creation, and you said the word right. They use the quote like, with content creation, you can be a show can make you a participant or a hostage, right? You like, and it's a little extreme, especially in today's day and age. But the point was right. More people are going to want to have their voice be heard, and have the host highlight something to them or ask them their opinion, as you pointed out with what you do. I think people appreciate that, and I think that's why it's one of the things I love. I need to do, quite frankly, a better job of
Well,
that.
but
uh
you
you
do.
know
You guys, when you do your live streams, you have participants. You have the
we
chat.
do, we do. I'm just saying we got to do. I think I could do. I could even do a little bit more, even with this podcast,
Mhm.
Craig, on that level, more than I do now. And that's the thing. This is the 6th year of the show, or almost the 6th year. Sometimes, and I think it happens to more than just me. Sometimes you get, I don't want to say stuck in the mud, but oh, that's the way we've always done it, and that's
Mhm.
not an answer. That's not a correct necessarily a correct answer. And yeah, the show is different today than it was 5.5 years ago, or even 2 years ago. But I mean, I need to do a little bit more focus on that, and take a little bit of a page out of your book as well, because I think it's fun, right? And that's what this hobby's supposed to be.
Mhm.
And regardless how many years or years I have or haven't been doing it, right? Like you said, I'm learning. I don't know everything. I'm learning something every day, as I should. And I always say, the minute I stop learning about the hobby, I stop caring, or I don't
Yeah.
care anymore. And that'll be a nice cue for me to, like, might be time to, like, hang up the card, so to speak. So that's not going to happen as far as I'm concerned. But is it you're an inspiration in that terms of, like, I can be better, and I need to be better, regardless of one show is different than the other, but we can do it more across the board. So hats off to you. I love what you do. Speaking of that, and we'll kind of give out where people can find that interactive hobby content. So any socials you want to share, all that good stuff. Take your time.
All right. Well, I mean, again, most of my efforts go to my YouTube channel, which is MidLife Cards. MidLife Sports Cards is the technical name, but if you're looking for the tag, everything, every social media, Facebook, MidLife Cards, YouTube, MidLife Cards, Instagram, Twitter. I don't check Twitter very much. I don't check Facebook very much. I
You know
check.
how I know you don't check Twitter very much? It's called
Oh,
X. And don't feel
oh
bad.
yeah,
I
yeah,
I
yeah.
still do that. I still call it Twitter too. I'm just
Yeah,
busting your chops.
yeah, and it's so, but this is the platform, this is the medium, because again, as a teacher, the way that I think people learn, in the way that people communicate best, is not just through words like Facebook does or like X does. It's not just pictures like Instagram. It's not just video like TikTok. It's comments, it's written stuff, it's words, it's our seeing my body language, and it's this is the best platform, YouTube, for me. And that's one of the reasons I don't just do it as a podcast and I do it on YouTube, is because I want people to see me. Because I think when you see my eyebrows raise and you can see my excitement in my face and my hands get fire, going, it's the best form of communication for me. And so, but that's the place to find me, and hey, I am meeting new people every day. You and I spoke for the first time a couple of weeks ago, and now we're speaking again. And I
Yeah.
had a blast both times we've talked. And so this has just been an amazing way for me to connect with other people. And I'm just absolutely thrilled with how many friends I've made from this. I text friends and call friends all day long through this YouTube thing that started, about 20 months ago. So
Yeah, it's crazy. It's crazy. Well, with me, I do a little less YouTube, a lot less YouTube than you, because I have a face for not YouTube, is what I tell people. So that's one of the reasons. But no, all kidding aside, you're doing a terrific job, and I enjoy it as many others do. And and I'll have you back on. There's a couple things we didn't even get to today. So it gives me, as long as you come back, it gives you a reason to get you back on the pod.
Well, I really appreciate you having me on. I have a ton of respect for the platforms that you have, but more than anything, your positivity of the hobby, but also the fact that you really emphasize the history and the meaning behind the hobby, instead of just, like we were talking about earlier, easy come, easy go, the hot potato game. I love your reverence for the history of not just the games that we collect, but also the cards and the companies, and you know, to me, that's what it's all about. So I appreciate everything that you do, and it was honored to come on today, and I'd love to come back anytime.
Well, coming from you, I really do appreciate that, Greg. I'll just wrap it up like this. Like, we wouldn't be like, if you like where we are today, if you're in the hobby and enjoying the hobby today, that's my emphasis. Is like, we can enjoy the moment, but let's try to remember, how do we get to point B, right? There has to be a point A, and so whether it be, like you said, I love how you said companies and players and everything that has to happen to get to the where we are today. I guess that's why it bothers me, maybe more than it should, when I don't see other people sort of appreciate it. It's the old man on. I'll be the old man on the porch there, and I'll be proud of it. I guess I am.
Yeah,
I have a porch, and I am an old man, so it's not completely off base. But Greg, we'll have you back. I'd love to have you back on, and chop up the hobby some more, and I had a blast. So
I
thank
did
you.
too. Thank you, my friend.
All right, take care.